Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So in the second part of this IPR kit, we're going to be finally installing the frame mounted cooler, as well as the lines and the coolant lines and everything like that. So we're going to be cutting some stuff, installing some stuff. We have to install the coolant filter, and that goes over there. So we're going to go ahead and get started on that. The first thing we need to do is we have a diagram that is printed out from the directions they send. So we need to get this cut out and get it affixed to the cross member. This is designed to be set up so that you print it out and you put it up onto the bottom of the cross member, because generally your body's in the way. So the first thing I can tell you is print this out 100% full scale, cut your squares out in your circles here. Okay, so that's the first thing that we're going to do here. So I'm going to cut these out, and then we can go ahead and we're actually going to drill these from the top because it's a lot easier. So actually we're going to put this on the cross member the wrong way. So thankfully we can see through the paper to see our center points here. So I'm going to cut these out, and then we'll have a template to lay this onto the cross member to make sure it's in the right spot. So we have our holes cut out here, and basically we're going to set this down on the cross member like, there we go, like this. Now there's more than one square on this cross member, so you need to make sure that you follow the orientation of these two holes here, and that way you make sure that you get this in the proper spot. So we're going to lay this down on the cross member, and what I'm probably going to end up doing is cutting these lines as well, and that'll give us a little bit better area on where it's supposed to be, but it'll also give us a place that we can maybe tie this down with a piece of tape or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead, cut these lines off of here, and we're going to center punch the cross member down here. So get these cut out and show this to you down here, and we'll center punch these. I think we're going to use a 21/64 drill bit. They don't specify a drill bit size, but that should be okay, because I measured the studs that are on the actual cooler mount. So get this cut out, get it taped on the cross member, and get these center punched. So we have our template completely cut out here, and please make note of this arrow. So if you're doing this from the top like I am, we can't do that this way. We have to actually flip this over like this, because this is meant to go up on underneath this cross member. So since we're drilling this from the top, this is basically what we're shooting for here. Now you can see that the holes aren't exactly perfect here. So the main focus for me is going to be the square, because the square is the one that's going to be the most important for you here. And what it's going to do is we have a hole here that we have to drill and a hole here that we have to drill. Okay, so we want to make sure that this hole that we're going to drill doesn't interfere with this square or the outside edge of this cross member. So use your better judgment on aligning this, because if you make the hole too close to the front, you won't be able to put the nut on the bottom. So we want to make sure that we have enough space between our center point here and the square, and the center point and the cross member itself. So we have our paper lined up here, and we're just going to go ahead and give this a hit here. Okay, so we got our center point lined back up there. So we have a center punch here and a center punch here. You can see that the holes are not going to interfere with anything else, and we get to drill these now. So we're going to go ahead and drill these out. Like I said, we're going to use a 21/64. They don't specify a size for that, so as long as the cooler fits, we won't have to make those holes any bigger. I know that they say a 3/8 for the cooler over there, but it also isn't required to be that large. So get these drilled out, and we'll get our cooler mounted. Now I always start with a smaller bit here It keeps the walking to a minimum. So now we can step up to our larger bit. So we have our holes drilled now, and we'll test fit our cooler to make sure that it's going to fit in here. Make sure we get all these shavings off here. So we're going to have to drill a little bit bigger for these because their template is a little bit off. So we can either put it in and go like this, or we can just drill a larger hole. So since our holes don't line up, we're going to have to do it this way. There we go. So you can see it wobbles a little bit there, but once we tighten this down, we won't have any issues with that. So this is where our cooler is going to end up going here, and then our coolant lines will run down and under the tranny, and then these two lines actually run up to the oil cooler pipes, which we have to cut. So that's going to be a little bit interesting. So we'll mount this up here shortly, and we'll get the oil filter pipes cut. So we have our oil filter remote lines here. So these are actually from another engine. I actually had a technical difficulty when we were doing this for some reason, and we didn't get this on video. So thankfully I have another set of these so I can re-show you what I did here. So the idea here is we need to measure 3.75 inches from the start of this bend. Now that puts us right into this clamp. We'll be cutting it somewhere around this area here. So that puts the fitting like here. So this clamp, which we have in the vise here, actually bolts this whole system to the back of the block. So we'll have to do something with this clamp, and we'll figure that out as we go through the video here. However, we need to start at this line, measure 3.75 inches, which is 3 3/4 of an inch. Down, we'll make another mark, and we'll cut that there. Now down here, this is the start of this bend here. So we want to measure 1 inch from the start of this bend. Now it's a little hard to see, but whenever you get down and actually look at these pipes, you can figure out where this bend starts. You can see a little bit of a dip starting right here. So that little bit of a dip is the start of the bend. So we have our mark here, and I'm looking at it a little bit off of straight, so it's a little bit odd, but that's the start of your bend. So we'll make a mark 1 inch from here, and we'll cut this at 1 inch. Now this lower line will get the 45, this upper part of the line will get a 90, and then this part in the middle here will go away. So we have to cut these, and I was thinking about using a grinder because the tubing cutters I have are not the greatest, and these are steel lines, but we will see how that goes. I might do a test cut in the middle here, do a grinder, but to get these off of the van is kind of a pain in the butt, and I highly suggest doing it. But we're going to go ahead, get these cut, get them cleaned up, get them ready to put fittings on, and see what transpires out of this. So we've gotten these cut, and I decided against the grinder. and pulled out an older tubing cutter I had, and it actually cut it pretty decently. So we cut it and wire wheeled it so we have a nice clean surface there, and then we put the O-rings on and they are lubricated. We also did the other side here, and we loosely put it back together here. So the first thing we're going to do now is I've loosely installed the oil filter assembly down here, and we're going to put our pipes into the assembly here and route them up and get them installed up here as well. So the reason for this is we want these to be installed in the proper orientation so that when we tighten up the clamp that holds them together, they're in the right spot. So we're going to go ahead, get these pipes put in, and then we can start installing our fittings. So we have our hold down here. We're basically just going to put these in here kind of where they're supposed to go. Maybe. But before we get too far, we've got these kind of lined up. We need to put this clamp on. So I'm going to pull the one tube out and slide that around. Get it slid up here a little bit. Get our pipes pushed into the upper mount here. We'll take this guy off down here for right now, so we can get the tube put in it. So we got that bottom one put in. Now these top ones are a little bit tighter. Give them a good push. And now they are in and also. So our clamp here is kind of where it needs to be. And we're going to go ahead and get our lower tube there and get our upper bracket installed and our lower retainer installed here. So before we put this extra piece of pipe in here, I'm going to slide our bracket in and get this tube put in as well. So I'm not going to tighten these down just yet, because if we need to spin this any certain way, we can do that. The only one I am going to tighten up is the one up top. Because that will lock that in. You can see it still wiggles, but it'll lock that in, and then we're going to put this bracket that holds these together where it's supposed to be here. You can kind of tell where it was, and tighten these back down. So now at this point, we are able to install our 90 up here and our 45 down here onto these tubes. Now, I may have to loosen this back up to be able to tighten this up, but these are a compression style fitting here. So we have the nut, an olive, so to speak, and the actual elbow here. So this is basically an adapter. So the nut goes on here, then the olive, and then their fitting would go on here as well. Now, I'm not going to tighten this up too much here because we want it to be able to spin, but you can see that it falls right off. So we're going to have to put a little bit of a tightening on this to get it to seat the way we want it to, and then make sure that we get our orientation right. So we're going to have our fitting here. Now, I like to just double check to make sure that that's all seated correctly. And we have our wrenches here. So this big guy here is 1.25 inches. And then this is 1.16 inches. So this is going to be lots of fun here. So it is snugged up here, but we can still move it a little bit the way we need to. And once we get this oriented correctly so that it clears everything, then we will go ahead and put our hoses on. So now we need to do the 45 down here at the bottom. It is the same setup here, and we do with our nut first, and then the collar, make sure that it's on there, and the 45. So we can spin this a little bit here to make it clear the transmission. I'm not going to tighten that guy up yet because we need to put our hoses on. So our hoses are going to come from here and go down to the oil cooler, which is out of the frame, and then also same from here down to the oil cooler, which is down on the frame here. So we'll get our two hoses. There is a long and a short for these hoses. So I'm going to double check and make sure that they are going to the right spots here and make sure that we get them in the right orientation here. So I'm going to double check that and we'll start putting our hoses on. So here's our hoses here. So we have a long one and a short one. So the long one is supposed to go down to the frame rail side of the oil cooler. So we're just going to thread that guy on there loose, just kind of snug there. And then route it down through our fuel line here. So we've got this hose loosely installed here. I'll probably end up putting a piece of rubber around it down here just to protect this fuel filter. We're pretty close to the fuel filter down here, which is a little bit out of the frame here. So we'll go ahead and grab the other hose, get it threaded on up here. And then it goes down to the oil cooler as well. So here's what we're looking at here. Now we didn't tighten this one up yet. I got to put a little bit of a rubber hose around this just to keep it from chafing there, which is no big deal. In hindsight, I probably would have moved this filter up a little bit closer, but it shouldn't make a difference. It's not even really pushing on it, it's just kind of touching it. So oil cooler's down here. It's not tight yet. We just have the nuts put on it there. So we have this line, which comes up to the 90, and then the 45 line comes down to this one over here. Now these other hoses that are going to go on here are for coolant. Those will run down and across. So with these all ran kind of the way we want, I'm going to tighten our clamp down here for the oil housing and make sure that the oil housing is all installed before I do that. And then tighten up our 45 here, which is a little bit difficult to see, and double check and make sure our 90 is tight, and then tighten all these hoses up. So we'll get all this sorted out. now that we've had that all tight here, you can see that this still wiggles a little bit. So we'll tighten this all up here and hopefully it'll kind of hang out here the way we want it to. So we've got this 45 tight here, and not super crazy about this clearance right here. May come in and maybe lob a little bit of this corner off this transmission here, just so it's not really doing that, because it's like we could make that a little bit lower, but I need to make sure that this isn't going to come off. Yeah, so that's good there. So now we need to make sure that we do this top one here. Now we have, these are all tight. We can go ahead and get the oil cooler done. So both of these fittings are 1.25 inches. And we have this all tightened up now. So we have this line here running down underneath, and it's in no danger here. Now we could take it up here, but that's kind of a good way to kink it there. It's just not happy. You can see we've got a little bit of a twist in this hose here, so we have to actually loosen this up and fix that little issue there. So we're going to be moving these hoses around a little bit and making them good and tight. We definitely need to address this little bit of a twist here. And I think we have a little bit down here yet. So we'll loosen these hoses up and retighten them up again. But now that we've done that, we can go ahead and move on to doing our cooler and coolant filter, which would be over here, and they'll run up to these ports here. So we got our hoses all straightened out here, got rid of any kinks or anything like that in these hoses. Basically what you have to do is you have to hold this brass fitting here as you tighten the collar. So these are a compression style fitting, and I don't know what's inside these. They could be a PTFE or a hard plastic. So you have to be very careful you don't twist these off. They are stainless braided, but this braiding is only for abrasion. And so basically these are like a 3-piece type fitting. You have your collar, and then you have your insert that goes inside the fitting, and then your collar that holds the outside of the fitting. So this makes it like a compression fitting. So you got to hold the brass area of this right here, and then tighten your collar to your fitting here. So that's what we ended up doing here. And what that did was it let us keep this hose from spinning. So now we need to tighten this guy up, which is pretty simple, just the 2 nuts on the bottom. So that is good and solid now. And we have our oil cooler lines 100% installed. So now what we can do is do our coolant lines. Before we get started with this, I want to show you the pipe we cut out of here. So you can see we cut this with the tubing cutter. You can see there's a little bit of a lip in there. So you don't want that lip to stay there. And you've got a little bit of burrs on here. So we cut this with the tubing cutter, and then we used a deburring tool here. Basically all you do is just go around it like this. Now I just did that real quick, but you can see it kind of gets rid of the burr, and that's why I suggest taking these pipes off to do this. Now I have to go around this a couple more times. This is just a piece of junk pipe now, but you want to get all that burr off of there. You can see that little bit of a hook there in that inside, but those can eventually work their way out and end up in your oil filter or worse. So I wanted to show you why when you're doing tubing cutting that you need to have that deburring tool. And then second of all, this is the bolt that mounts the oil pipes to the block. So that clamp that we took off earlier. This is a bolt I used for that clamp. You can see how much longer it is. So these are metric. I don't have millimeters for you, but you can see that this guy's 2 inches long. Actually, it's a little bit longer than that. It's like 2 1/4 full length, but your threads are like 2 1/8. But you would need something that's approximately 2 inches long. Now, the reason I say you need something like this is for this clamp. Now, this clamp bolts back to the block, and without this clamp, these move all over the place. So without this clamp on here, I don't necessarily like how much this moves. This moving is not exactly a good thing. So with that clamp put back on here, it facilitates vibrations in down here. So this still moves. Now we'll need to cover this here a little bit later. It may involve cutting this piece off of here or putting something on here to hold it away, whatever we need to do. But this isn't exactly ideal. And then we still need to put that piece of hose down here to keep this from rubbing on the filter. But this is obviously our electric fuel system, so you don't have this unless you do this fuel system. And I was concerned about this being in the way of this IPR kit, but it's not necessarily as bad as I was expecting it to be. So the other hose doesn't touch anything. I almost kind of wish that they would have put a straight fitting on here and made this hose a little bit longer and let it come up and over, and then put maybe a 90 down here to shoot it up so it can come up and around. But that's something that we could change if we really wanted to. However, this is the kit that they give, and we're going to make this work without any problems here. So wanted to really go over this bolt and this bracket here. So this bolts to the block here. So if you can get a longer bolt here, I do believe this is an M6 bolt, and I don't know how well you can see in there, but we used most of the threads on that bolt to get this to be snug and tight. So these don't move anymore, which is what we want. So we'll go ahead and get started on that coolant filter now. So we have our coolant filter here. Now, before we install this, we have to install our fittings. Now I've previously put Teflon tape on these. Your elbow would go on the side with the out. So we'll thread this guy into here. And then the straight port goes on the inside. So we're going to take these over to the vise and just crank them down in here. The 90 will want to be facing down whenever you're done here. And you can see that this is still loose, which is fine. So we're going to put this in the vise, give it a good clamp, tighten these down, and this is the orientation that you want these to be in. So we're going to bolt our bracket on like this, and it'll be on the frame with the frame over here. So we'll go tighten these guys down, and then we'll start working on getting this mounted. So here's our tightened product here. And these do take 1 1/16 wrench. So we had to use 1 1/16 to tighten these up. And now we need to mount our bracket onto the frame before we can get this put on, because you don't want to put this on yet because it gets in the way of your bolts here. So we are going to go ahead and get this bracket put on, and then we can put our bolts in the bottom here. So we're back here, and this is an exhaust hanger bracket. So the exhaust hangers are held on with studs and nuts usually. So we're supposed to take that nut off of there. Now this bracket will go onto that stud now. Now there is an existing hole in the frame here that we can't use because it's at a level. And we really want this to be level. So you can see how much of that hole is still visible. So it's a half a hole that is in the way here. Now, trying to drill that would be a nightmare. So what we're going to do is slide this bracket all the way over to the left here. And then re-level. So now we have clear range to drill a hole here. So what we'll do is we'll center punch this and drill we'll start with a 21/64 again, or actually a smaller, but we'll end up at 21/64 and drill a hole here in the middle of that bracket, and then that'll give us our mounting position for our coolant filter. Now the stud that's sticking out down here will not affect it. Let's take our level off of there. Now this guy goes here like this, and the harness is not affected, and you have lots of clearance here for that stud. So we're going to go ahead and center punch this, drill this hole, get this bracket mounted in here, and then get the coolant filter mounted. Now we saw that this coolant filter had no restrictions on anything around it. So we could move that hole back a little bit if we wanted to, but I wanted to get it right in the middle there in case we just needed to adjust it for some stupid reason. We can't go any more this way, but we could bring it forward if it needed to come forward for anything. So it gives a little bit of leeway there. So I'll drill this hole and we'll get this mounted up. So we'll take our supplied bolt here, and you can see it's a little bit too big, the hole, but that's okay because these are metric bolts. And we can go ahead and get our bracket mounted here. Now, 0.1 degrees I'm not too worried about. So we have our bracket put on here, and now we need to go ahead and mount our coolant filter itself. So let me grab the bolts for it, and then it'll mount on top like this. But we're going to take the coolant filter off because it makes it a little bit easier to see what I'm doing here. So you can actually move the housing fore and aft. I decided to place it right in the middle here. And I did not put anti-seize on those, even though we're threading steel bolts into aluminum. And the reason I did that is because I don't want this to possibly fall off. So we'll leave this a little bit loose for now because we got to put a little bit of lubricant on that O-ring. So now we have to run our lines. So one will run to the engine, one will run to the cooler, and then one will run from the cooler up to the engine. So this will be our final step for getting these routed. And these are a little bit funky to route because we don't have a van body here. So I can't show you how to attach the one hose, but I can show you the routing for it. So here we are on top of the engine again. We have our coolant adapter here. So this one here, the forward one, will run to the coolant filter. This one here, the firewall side, will run to the brass fitting here, the furthest, closest to the frame rail. And then this port here comes to the coolant filter. So we need to run these hoses, and when we run these hoses, this one here will come down and across. Now they give us heat shielding here, and it will run down through here. Okay, doesn't come here, but it will catch this hose, and then you'll have a pair of two hoses that will run down under the frame rail, grab the cross member here, and go across to the cooler. This hose here, which comes from the engine, will come up here. It'll actually mount to the bottom of the body, come around the body mount on this side, up to this port here. So we're gonna run all these hoses and get them all hooked up here and show you the routing firsthand. So that's how this is going to lay out. However, you know, obviously we got to run everything and zip tie everything and get it all sorted out. So that's our next step. So before we start putting our hose on, we took our heating insulation. Now this is one big roll. I cut it in half. They provide this with the kit here. So this stuff kind of sucks to put on. I was trying to put it on earlier and it just sucks. So I don't know if there's a lubricant that you can put on this, but there's no good way to put this on. So I'm going to try to get a hold of this and try to get it pulled on here. But yeah, kind of sucks. This stuff sucks to put on. So tried getting it on there and finally figured out how to get this put on here. So I'll show you that trick here in a little bit. But before we get any farther here, I want to try to get some of this routed, because this one here is going to end up coming down and going over to the oil cooler, and we'll have one come from the filter to the cooler, and then we'll just have this guy here that'll come up here. So what we're going to do is get this guy put on here and get it kind of routed down here. Now in the directions it says that this is supposed to go in this general area, so we don't have the body on here to really show where it's supposed to go, but it's supposed to go here. It'll be on that side of the body mount. So this guy's going to go down and over to the cooler, but because we want to route this so we have the correct length here, we're going to zip tie this one along the way, grab the one from the elbow here out of the filter and run it over to the cooler itself. So that way we can just route these as we go, and then we just got to cut them over there at their proper length instead of trying to measure it out or say, ah, yeah, that's good. So that's our goal here. So we're going to take this end of the hose and put it on here with a clamp, and then we'll run both of these hoses over there and get them where they need to be. So we've got our hoses oriented here. So we have the near side of this cooler to go to the near side of the filter. So this brass elbow will go to the cooler itself right here, and then that brass elbow will return back to the engine up here. And then we just have to make a new hose from the engine to the filter here. So I'm going to put a zip tie here close to the exhaust. And they don't say to put any heat shielding here. However, I may build something to go underneath this exhaust pipe, because it does get hot. I mean, it's a diesel, so we don't want to be burning any of this hose. Now the hose is capable of carrying heat, however, we don't want to be burning it. And if they have heat shield up here, I feel like we would maybe need some heat shield down here, but getting it to where it needs to get is a little bit difficult, and I think I'd rather have the heat wrap all the way up through here where it gets very hot. So we have our hoses oriented here, so we're going to flip over to the other side and get everything marked over there and cut so we can get that attached. All right, so we got that one cut to length here. So we're going to slip this guy on here. Now we can get this guy cut to length. And then we'll put one more zip tie, at least for now, right here. So we'll probably have to put one more zip tie on the other side there, and then we can start running our hose for the inlet from the cooler back up to the engine. So now is where I get to show you the fancy trick for putting the sleeve on. So we have our blower gun here, and the idea here is to get this guy started on here and then stick the nozzle up under the coating here. This is usually pretty fun. So it'll curl on you here. You just kind of keep working it back. There we go. Just keep working this through here with the air. So you can see we have the hose out there. So now we need to get this a little bit further down on the hose here because we have to get it down around that exhaust. So we'll just test fit this and make sure that it's the right length here. And if it's not, we'll come back and move it a little bit more. So needs to go a smidge more here. See, I was trying to pull, it doesn't work that way. You gotta go this way. Now that should be long enough. So looks like we're long enough here. So we're going to go ahead and put our clamp on. And slide it on the fitting up here. I may take this clamp apart and turn it around. Now this guy, I think we're gonna leave unhooked for now until we get the body on. That way we can get the accurate length here. But until then, because I don't feel like losing anything here, we're just gonna slide this on here. So we'll have to cut this to length once we get the body put on. And we're gonna tidy up all of our zip ties here. And I'm going to put one more zip tie right here so that it's held a little bit better with this wiring. It's not relying on just one zip tie. Now, there will be a void here. We can move this. We may move this heat shielding down a little bit because it's going to be in the proximity of this exhaust manifold. I might want to move it down another 2 more inches, but it's as simple as putting the air blower in here and pulling on it and getting it moved down. So we have the hoses installed here. We just have to tighten up all of our clamps. So that's the last step here, is tighten the clamps, cut off our zip ties, which is not very exciting. So hopefully you enjoyed our install of the IPR kit. Their directions definitely need some improving. I found a couple grammatical errors as far as 3.75 inches for this measurement here, okay? Well, they say 3.75 and then parentheses they say 3 3/8. Well, 3.75 is 3 3/4. So there was that grammatical error. When we were doing the top here, there was a grammatical error for a torque spec. So whenever you read their directions, please make sure that you read the directions very carefully, because they can really screw you up, because you'll see a Newton meter and then you'll see a foot pound and then you'll see a Newton meter and a foot pound, and the Newton meters will be the same, but the foot pounds will be different. So you want to make sure that you are using your brain when you're installing this kit, because the instructions definitely need a little bit of tweaking there. The directions to install this on the van are not super clear. It's a lot to do here. I think it'd be a lot easier if they would send you hoses that were pre-cut and maybe possibly with the heat insulation pre-installed to where they would really like it. Because, a lot of guys would struggle with that heat insulation. I know I did there at first. But, it's definitely, a good kit. It's well engineered. It's just, it's hard to put on because, it's just a lot to do. Taking the oil pipes off is not something that they say you need to do, but in reality, it's like after you do it and you mess with it, and it's a lot easier to take the pipes off, to cut them. You make sure you don't have any metal shavings in it. You get them clean. You can clean up the tubes with the wire wheel and make sure that you have a good surface for that compression fitting to seat onto. Hopefully we don't have any issues with leaks with these, because we're not going to find out until we get the thing running. So, hopefully we don't have to deal with any of those issues. But the install kit wasn't too bad. He said we still got to figure out something with this here, either cut this ear off the transmission or build something to possibly hold this line out away, just put a clamp on it through the hole here just to hold this line here from wiggling and spinning and everything else, because that's just going to wear out the O-ring that's down in the oil filter base. So that's pretty much the only issue I have with this kit. The template was a little bit wrong. Obviously it's going to vary on your printer if you print it just the wrong way or the right size, whatever. It varies a little bit. It's very rough. So I suggest, measuring and drilling your holes to a measurement that you take off the actual oil cooler base. But we've got everything done in the top here. We've got everything done here down on the frame. We just got to do some line management here, which is nothing crazy here. So that's about it. Once we get the body on, we can secure and finish up that last heater hose over there. But yeah, that's pretty much the IPR install for a E-Series 6-liter. So much easier to service this oil cooler than it would be to get to the one up in the engine, especially with our new fuel system. So hopefully this will help you guys out in doing an IPR oil cooler relocation on your E-Series with a 6-liter in it. So hopefully it'll help you out and maybe give you the option, because they don't advertise this on their website as of right now. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate you watching and supporting me. So hopefully you can hit that like button, and if somebody can benefit from these videos, share them out. Hopefully we can get some more eyeballs on the stuff that I'm doing here, and hopefully it's up to you guys' standards. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll catch you on the next one.